Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to some late breaking news from Checkmate Humanity, where I do social media commentary and inform people about the inhumanity of social media and how to cope with it. According to John Paul, an investigative journalist who writes for multiple national news outlets and runs a hyperlocal news site called The Beaver Countian, Ronnie and Cindy Watts, the parents of family annihilator Chris Watts, has engaged law enforcement about the nonprofit Fight for a Family, which is operated by Lana Oriani, a YouTuber who uses her channel, Truth and Transparency, to promote and fundraise for the nonprofit. I learned this just a few minutes ago as I was watching a live stream on Truth and Transparency, and John Paul made a number of comments in the chat while Lana Oriani was streaming. In the chat, John Paul stated that the Watts have sent Miss Oriani a letter accusing her of forging their signatures for the paperwork to start the nonprofit, where they were named as board members. He also stated that the Watts have sent the letter to law enforcement and wanted to ask Ms. Oriani for her perspective. In a minute, I'll show you some clips from the interaction, but you won't find John Paul's comments in the chat from tonight's live stream anymore because they were almost immediately deleted as soon as they happened. But before I show you the clips with his comments and Oriani's reaction, I want to provide some context for those of you who haven't followed the Watts case closely. In August of 2018, Chris Watts was convicted for the murder of his pregnant wife and two young daughters in Colorado. He confessed and pleaded guilty to killing and burying his pregnant wife in a shallow grave and then putting his two toddler girls in oil tanks, separate oil tanks, next to where their mother was buried on the Anadarko refinery site. This is where Chris Watts worked. He's now serving several life sentences in a federal penitentiary in Wisconsin. Well, fast forward to about February of 2021, and Chris Watts and his family were actively seeking ways to attain post-conviction relief. Chris Watts pleaded guilty to the crimes, like I said, and is serving several life sentences, but the Watts believed their son was innocent and engaged various people from social media to get help for his post-conviction relief. This is how the Watts met Lana Oriani, who claimed that she could find them the perfect lawyer to apply for Chris's appeal. Ronnie Watts traveled to Denver with Oriani and a few others, and shortly afterward, Oriani announced that they had found a legal team and was forming a nonprofit called Fight for a Family, which would fund the attorneys for their legal fight. And although Ms. Oriani stated that Ronnie and Cindy Watts would be members of her three-person board, she claimed that Fight for a Family would offer its services to other people who she felt were wrongfully convicted. Soon after the trip to Denver and the announcement of the nonprofit, public charity, Oriani announced that Fight for a Family had taken on a couple of cases in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. It's because of her involvement in these cases, the murders of Rachel Del Tondo, Tyreek Pugh, and Officer Jamie Hnaim, that John Paul from the Beaver Countian became interested in her involvement in these local cases. Now, here's where I want to insert a little ethical disclaimer right here. I have a bias with regard to Ms. Oriani because I was one of numerous people who called into question the practices of her nonprofit or public charity formation. And as a result, she eventually sued me for what she says is defamation. Of course, defamation. She meant to say defamation, but in the paperwork she said defamation. This case is currently on the docket in the state of Ohio, and in the complaint, Ms. Oriani claims that I teamed up with John Paul from the Beaver Countian to take her and her nonprofit down. Well, I've contacted John Paul about this statement, and he informed me that he became aware of Ms. Oriani because of some concerning issues with the way she was in threatening and intimidating witnesses in the cases in Beaver County. Some of her activities in Beaver County have also raised questions about her presidency of a public charity, and some of those include almost getting her client evicted from public housing and also engaging in a sexual relationship with the mother of Sheldon Jeter Jr., one of her nonprofit clients. That's my ethical disclaimer. I do have a bias in this situation. Nonetheless, I do intend to report this as fairly as possible. So, not long after Oriani formed the nonprofit, she announced that Fight for a Family would not be funding the post-conviction relief for Chris Watts. And since that time, a lot of questions have been asked of Oriani about the validity of her nonprofit and the involvement of the Watts, because rumors had been swirling around that the Watts no longer wanted to be part of this nonprofit and actually hadn't signed any paperwork themselves to become board members for Fight for a Family. Well, it appears as of tonight that we know that these rumors are being put to rest, because John Paul stated in Ms. Oriani's chat that the Watts have expressly indicated to her that they want no involvement. Although no one on YouTube besides Oriani has seen this letter, so we can't say definitively whether this letter exists. I've talked before about the seriousness of a national news journalist making such public statements. If he's bluffing about this letter, his reputation and ability to continue reporting will be in serious jeopardy. Based on what John Paul said in the chat, and based on my own personal experience working with serious news media for over 25 years, I'm more than confident that what he said in Ms. Oriani's chat was just the tip of the iceberg. But even if it was the tip of the iceberg, it was a lot, especially for a true crime community that has been obsessed with the Chris Watts case since the crime occurred. So let's take a look at some of the statements that were made by John Paul in the chat and Oriani's reaction to them.
Because he's so thirsty. He can't write to save his life in his stupid website, but he comes here just to... You're not welcome here. I think that you need to leave. God, I mean, he has nothing better to do. Stalk my shiz. Trust me, there ain't no fraud. Everybody did a hell of a number on defaming me. I don't know what you think the website is making or not, but that's what I think is funny is you talk about fraud. There ain't no fraud. And the trolls that you hang out with, they defamed quite enough to make sure that Fight for a Family wasn't going to go anywhere. So the damages just keep on mounting.
What's wrong with you? And then I got the Beaver County in here saying, oh my God, Lana, do you have any fucking comments? Yeah. Take your pen and shove it. That's my fucking comment. That's why I laugh when someone with a limp dick comes the fuck in my chat and wants to ask me, do I have a comment? Yeah. My comment is fuck you. That's my comment.
So one thing I also want to mention, but I was not able to screen record, is that while Ms. Oriani was responding to John Paul's comments, she brought up the name Deanna Romai, but didn't provide any context. She just threw out the name. But by her tone, it sounded like the name was supposed to threaten or intimidate John Paul. So I looked up the name, and it appears that John Paul wrote a number of articles about Deanna Romai because she runs a Facebook group that caused an unnecessary citywide panic a few years ago based on misinformation that was spread by her large Facebook group. Ms. Romai has apparently been convicted of harassment 2 different times, and one of those times she was caught filming a woman through her bedroom window. As you may recall, I reported about a month ago that Ms. Oriani has been slapped with a permanent protection order for stalking another creator. This permanent protection order is pending appeal by Ms. Oriani, who's continued talking about the creator and the situation while under court order not to do any of those things. So let's just break this down, okay? Ms. Oriani, a woman who's been ordered by a judge not to stalk another creator, and her associates because of her activity on YouTube, appears to be teaming up with a woman who's been convicted of harassment twice because of her behavior while running a Facebook group. What could go wrong, right? And now I have a few things to say of an editorial nature, and this is where my opinion comes in about what we have just learned. Everything else was facts and a tiny little bit of opinion just before I'm saying this. First, it may seem odd and possibly even unprofessional for a national news reporter to enter a chat of a small YouTuber and ask questions about her public charity, claiming all sorts of things about this president of this charity. But I can tell you, as someone who's worked with the media for decades, to me, he appears to be doing his job. He's talked about investigating Ms. Oriani in previous chats And this is something that I've reported in a previous video. And this means that he's likely going to publish something in the near future. And it would be beyond irresponsible for him to publish this report without getting the perspective of the person he's reporting on. That would be one-sided journalism, and he would probably get hogtied, in all honesty, by his editor if he tried to submit a report without some comment from Ms. Oriani. So in my view, he was doing what a professional reporter does. And let's put this all in perspective, okay? He wasn't just asking a YouTuber for her perspective. He was asking the president of a public charity whether she had a comment about concerns that are being brought to him about the alleged board members of that nonprofit. I don't know this for sure, but I'd imagine that he probably tried to get her comment privately before attempting to get her comment publicly. He may have not gotten a response from her and seen that going to her public YouTube channel is the only way to get a response from her. Now, picture, if you will, a national news reporter going to the YouTube channel of like the Red Cross and asking legitimate questions about how Red Cross was being run. And then hearing the spokesperson, maybe even the president of the Red Cross, saying something like this.
That's why I laugh when someone with a limp dick comes the fuck in my chat and wants to ask me, do I have a comment? Yeah. My comment is fuck you. That's my comment.
You probably can't picture that because it would never happen, right? And it shouldn't. If John Paul is wrong about his reporting, that's all that needs to be said. Nothing more, nothing less. And then let the proof come out in the pudding. But as we saw in the clips earlier, Ms. Oriani didn't deny any of the claims that he was making. Her broad claim was that there was no fraud. Otherwise, she engaged in a great deal, in my opinion, of deflection and ad hominem without giving adequate responses to his questions. So I'm going to end this with a bit of commentary about Ronnie and Cindy Watts. When Ms. Oriani started this nonprofit with their names, they were probably at the most vulnerable moment of their entire lives. They had just lost almost their entire family in one night. They lost their daughter-in-law and their grandchildren, including their unborn grandson. And they lost their son to a lifetime of prison. And while there are boatloads of services for victims of crimes, there's virtually no support for the family of an accused murderer. Along comes Ms. Oriani, promising to get the best attorneys and promising to start a nonprofit that would do all the funding. Not only did both of those endeavors fail, it now appears that she exploited the Watts' names as board members against their will. If this is all true, it's flat out wrong, amoral behavior. And I sincerely hope that people will take a good, hard look at the people they're associating with and depending upon, especially if they come from the world of social media and have literally no professional experience or credentials to do what they say they're going to do. This is definitely not the end of the story, and as I said before, I think we can expect John Paul's reporting to show up somewhere in the near future, and when it does, I'll let you know. Thanks for watching, be careful who you trust, and peace out.